Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Vincent Green.
And I'm your host, Noel John Toohey.
And this is Invasion of the Potty Snatchers. Let's get to it, motherfuckers. All right, Noel, we're back, but we're not back alone. This time we brought along Kira Walker for our zombie series. And the thing is about our zombie series is the hitch is we don't pick the movie, the guest does. So Kira, can you tell the folks at home who you are, what you do, and why'd you pick this movie?
All right. Yes, my name is Kira Walker. I am a co-host of the Scarifyer Podcast. The movies that I selected was 1932's White Zombie, which is a very unknown Bela Lugosi film.
Yeah.
And then we have 1992's Dead Alive or Brain Dead, which was a New Zealand film. I kind of wanted to do something total opposite. So let's have some fun.
Like,
yeah, so is the reason you picked White Zombie, is it because it's kind of unheralded for someone that's so famous like Bela Lugosi, or is it a movie you've seen many times and you really enjoy yourself?
Well, one of the things about my background a little bit is I grew up with the Universal monster movies. My dad was a huge fan of them, so I grew up with them. So Bela Lugosi was very big in my family. And I always was a fan of his. And White Zombie, I actually didn't find out about until much later years. And I learned that it was kind of what kicked off zombie fad, I guess is what you would call it. And it's another reason why I picked like the two total opposite movies that we're going to be talking about today, is because to see like where it began and then like 6 years later, where it ended up. So those two contrasts, I think, would make interesting.
Yeah, like when we did a movie earlier on in the series, Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price with Don Shanahan, and we were talking about how, like, even though they were vampires in a sense, but like for most of the movie, they kind of gave away, they came across as zombies. And we were talking about how this was kind of like the genesis of the genre because they didn't even know what to call them. But like, I never even knew about this movie. And this movie is 32 years previous to Last Man on Earth, and this actually has the real and the original zombie lore. It's not talking about like people biting each other or being passed like a disease or a virus. This is a very supernatural hoodoo voodoo sort of thing from the Haitian origin of the zombie lore. And it has actually happened in history where people in Haiti have talked about where they've gone missing for 2 or 3 years and they find out that people have used substances or drugs on them and they've zombified them and made them into a slave. And like, so this is actually really deeply ingrained into Haitian culture. And like on the outset, if you look at a movie like White Zombie, it's like it couldn't seem any more alien to us when we look at what we think of a zombie, but it actually is the more accurate in terms of the zombie lore in compared to like what George A. Romero popularized in the 60s and 70s.
No, exactly. It's very much a traditional to, like you said, the folklore of everything. And it almost was like zombies were originally more like possessions type idea, like people were like possessed in a sense. And I just think it's absolutely fascinating to what it has turned into now. So it's really interesting to see this film, because you just think they've been like brainwashed or whatever, but you put the name zombie on it. Kind of a mind
away with it.
It's so weird because like it's like words, how they change definition through time. You know what I mean? Like, it's like when we think of zombie, we think of the living dead. We think of something that's trying, brains, something's trying to eat our face. But back then, it was
the end of the world. This was just one guy in the corner of the world exhibiting control. Like, if you stayed out of his way, he wasn't like trying to take over the planet. The people he took over were people who offended him or interested him.
Which I think is a little bit more terrifying.
which actually is, yeah.
It's like the scopolamine. There's a drug in South America where they call it devil's breath. It's grows on plants or on trees all over South America and in Colombia in particular. And they actually get it, they ground into a powder, and you can actually walk up and blow it in someone's face. And they say it's so potent that you can actually control that person. Like, people have been robbed, they've been dosed, and they'll be walked back to their hotel room, and the person will take all their belongings, and they'll just turn around and walk back out, and that person will have little to no memory of these things, like, or if they have any memory, they'll remember that they had no control over themselves. So it's crazy like that. there is.
Vinny, that's awful. That drug was called.
If you think I can spell
All right, into the movie. For something that I was loosely, being a metal fan, I was loosely aware White Zombie had taken the name from the White Zombie band. Rob Zombie's band had taken the name White Zombie from Boo Rob Zombie, but he had taken it from this film White Zombie. So I was kind of loosely aware of its existence, but never looked into it. Didn't know it was Bela Lugosi, and I'm a fan of Bela Lugosi. And then when I actually got to watch it, it had all that campy delight that you just love from those early 30s films, where its sound isn't that old. It's kind of a relatively new thing, but everyone still has that over expression. That, like, you know, like bang, and then you have to like grab your stomach and you have to, like, you know, fall and, you know, take something down with you. So I really, really enjoyed going back and getting to enjoy it. And it was Bela Lugosi, I think, very much so at the height of his powers. It was like he played a character called Murder. Is that correct?
That doesn't tell you who the bad guy is.
I have a bad feeling about this Mr. Murder.
that goatee that screamed evil.
It just did.
Yeah. Like, and he was just like the end of like the mustache type idea.
So menacing.
Was this a film you grew up on, Ciara? This is a film you've seen many times.
Yeah, she's 93 years old, man.
93 years.
No, Bela Lugosi was a huge staple in my family. Like I said, my father was always a huge fan of the Universal monsters, and Bela Lugosi was really big. He did a lot of films like this. He even did like The Raven and all that kind of stuff, the Edgar Allan Poe films that they actually put on screen. So he was a really, really big part of me growing up. And I think this is like literally the like 8th or 9th time I've seen this film. So.
Do you think this film was like a Nexus event where because we know we kind of touched on it, but this was zombies as we know them, even though it's so different. This was, somebody said, what about just this? They're not smart. What they have is numbers, and they have relentlessness. Yeah. So what if we had a lot of them? Wouldn't that be a scary concept? Do you think that this was a time where somebody kind of looked at this movie and maybe the zombie fad would have never have happened? Or it turns out my film knowledge is what it was. Maybe there was a 1901 film that I don't know. But this film, it's
a whiter zombie.
Yeah. But this film being 90 years old and seeing them talking about zombie lore like Vinny touched upon, do you think this film might be, even just if it's not for you, the really old films, that you would have to appreciate it if you're a horror fan, that this was a film that was probably quite vital, that it had this ripple effect into the zombie horror movies we have now?
I definitely think we have a lot of the zombie genre to thank for this film, because it wasn't really a folklore that was brought over to the States, that wasn't really publicized really. And then you have this movie with Bela Lugosi where obviously he's a big name, it's going to draw people to the theater, and you have this folklore and people have never heard of it, so that's terrifying in itself. But now they're hearing dead being risen, brought back to life, but they're effectively like puppets type idea. And I think that really caught on with people. So I do think that opened the gate to, well, what more can we do with it? And I think that's really when, like, the 1960s, I think it took a little bit of time for it to like cook, I should say. But that's really when like the 1950s and 60s started to like, well, let's push it a little further and let's see how much more intense and how scary we can make this. So I really do think that this film kicked off something that no one would have ever really thought of, at least not until much later time. So this movie really did a bunch for the genre.
It probably like also influenced Hitler. He was probably like watching it. It's like, I could take over a lot of people. World War II started 7 years later.
Yeah.
So direct correlation. I don't know. I'm just laying out the evidence.
Bela Lugosi's fault.
Well, that's the thing. I suppose Bela Lugosi kind of became this kind of, especially with the Ed Wood film and all that kind of jazz, Plan 9 and all that, which I got to see in a theater a few years ago. Absolutely phenomenally bad film. Yeah, I did actually. But at the same time, he was actually, like you said, he was a big name. Like Bela Lugosi was the person, because I looked at the wiki for this, and and they had a poster, and it was like, oh, when the critics turned up their nose, you turned up in droves or something like that, and it made more money than all of the films of the previous week together had made on its opening night. It actually made bank. And at the end of the day, just like now, show me the returns, and I'll show you a movie star. And Bela Lugosi had returns. So even though it's a little bit camp, it did just show that how
much did it make in the box office? 6.5 tuppence or something?
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
They're like trading in like deer heights or something. Like, come on, it's the 30s. Did they have money back then? Come on. Throwing pebbles at each other.
I think you're gone back a little bit further.
I'm exaggerating. I'm allowed to exaggerate. I'm exaggerating. It's what I do.
But how did this film stand up for you, Ciara? After I'm sure it's a few years since you've seen it.
I actually watched it 2 nights ago.
Wow.
Obviously, it's very campy. It's kind of goofy. It's very cheesy. But one thing that I do admire about this film, and I always say it about films between the 1920s up until the 50s, and even a few later years, the wholesomeness of the way that they made the films is something that you can never replicate. You can never recreate that. So as far as that is concerned, I think it holds up beautifully because you will never be able to duplicate it. No, the dialogue isn't necessarily the best, and when you have somebody falling over a cliff and you can completely tell that it's a dummy, that looks bad.
I thought they nailed it.
But this movie is something that no one will ever be able to replicate or even really come close, because there's just something almost magical and mesmerizing about it, you know?
Like, I actually completely agree. I've even seen it in music and other genres where you just kind of go like, they try to create an older sound, a garage sound. So they throw all this production at it and all this technology. And they can't. It's so stupid. It's so counter.
It comes across so fake.
Exactly. Metallica made that Saint Anger album. They wanted to sound like their garage days, so they went into a big studio and they tried to mess with the mics and stuff to create a different sound. You're like, just go into a garage.
I was about
to
say,
a garage. Use the cameras. Go back to it, but they can't. We've moved on, and that's fair enough. But at the same time, you are right. There is, when you're looking at it, there's a little bit of magic there that, as corny as it is, it's there and it's gone now. So you have to, and it's nice to have a record of it. But I do think there was a hangover from going into sound. It felt very pantomime-y, the way people arrived on scene, whether it was a butler or a voodoo master, whatever exactly he was. Even
Bela Lugosi, motherfucker. That's
Bela Lugosi, yeah. But I do think that when they arrived, they announced themselves, and I was just sitting there, like I was smiling from ear to ear during the very short run, 67-minute run of this film.
Yeah, well, it's a long movie back then. It's like the early days of audio. Like, like I was full sure this movie was going to be a silent movie. I was like, threw it on. There was noise. I was like, yes. but like one thing, we did recently was the for our 50th episode on Body Snatchers was all the Body Snatchers movies, and something we spoke about is how when you go through the different iterations of the story and how each movie captured its moment in time, like the original from the 50s, the 70s, onwards to the 90s and the 2000s. And something you said, Ciara, is that it's so hard to replicate, like, and it's impossible to replicate these earlier movies or these earlier times, because we're just hampered by our advantages in a lot of ways, if that makes any sense, because when you look back then, this is the bare bones of movie making. This is the genesis of not just the zombie genre or even the horror genre. This is almost the genesis of movie making itself in a lot of ways, and the movie making that we come to know and love, with the sound, with the kind of big set pieces, like, hordes of zombies. All these things would have been unimaginable probably 20 years before that, in this, and to have that, like, even though it's so corny to us now, that's like cutting edge for 1932.
Leading edge. Absolutely.
Leading edge. So you have to give them their props, because even though it is a really corny movie to us, that like they really they pulled out all the stops and they showed a lot of ambition and actually how they made the movie for 1932. Like, but one of my favorite lines in the entire movie is when he goes down, the main character goes down to check on his girlfriend, and she's gone, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, either one or two things happened here. Either a dead cult took her body and are using it and these human bones for sacrifice. I'm like, what? And he's like, or she wasn't dead at all. I was like, who the fuck is this guy?
He says it like so calmly, like it's an everyday occurrence. Like,
oh, you know, dead cults, they'd be crazy.
You know, women.
Yeah. You don't even know their place when they're dead.
And we're cancelled. No.
I didn't say it. He said it. Possessed for a moment.
I did actually. I tell you what, we were speaking about the kind of bleeding edge. You know, when she's dead and the husband he's drinking, wallowing in his grief, and I seen her in like his spilled beer, and then he seen her on a chair and stuff like that, and they were superimposing her over it, and that would have been mind blowing at the time. And I always try and not turn my nose up to stuff like that because that simply was the absolute most bleeding edge thing that they could do at the time.
Yeah,
and if you like Vinny had said, if you were my age, if you were in your late 30s back then, so you had grown up on. Train arrives at station, and like
Penny Dreadful novels and stuff.
The Penny Dreadful novels. This would have been really, really phenomenal. And I think as a film buff, I think I can appreciate that. And I do think as a film buff, I can appreciate it for what it was.
I mean, like, can you imagine like the gasps in the theater when they did something like that at that time? Like, oh my gosh, how are they doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you watch Avatar, it would be the equivalent. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, with the glasses and everything. Yeah,
you know.
But they would like. I mean, we're so hard to impress now because I think everything is sped up to such an insane degree that we're just we've got like supercomputers in our pockets and stuff, and we just kind of
we're spoiled.
We're spoiled. But I think this film, like, when you're watching it, do you ever think to yourself, and maybe you think this, Kira, like, would you ever these films? You think just to be a fly on the wall. Just to go back for one day and not do anything special, just to sit in the theater and watch it with the people of its time. That's it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always fascinated with how they came up with the way these things are done. And they were very limited with their technology and props and stuff like that in the 1930s, because they also had like a depression going on. So things were extremely limited. So this was literally coming out of somebody's pure imagination and creativity, determination, and somebody's passion. And just to see that, like, for, like you said, one day, like even in the theater, to see it at its height and just hear everybody's reaction. I think that would be so amazing. I really do.
Yes.
Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
You know what I mean? Just like watching all the people back in the 1930s. Imagine what that would have been like when your life is like literally Depression era America. And you finally, like, you know what I mean, you finally go out and you get to see something like this. This could change your fucking life, like, you know what I mean?
Escapism.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know, when you go to see Spider-Man, it's like, fuck Rona, fuck the coronavirus. I'm going to go see Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like, you know, imagine what it was like back then. Like, you know, 1930s, the world is falling apart. Like World War I just ended like 14 years previous.
Tensions have just started hitting up in power a couple of months after the film was released.
You know what I mean? This movie was made in such a crazy like impasse in history between two gigantic events. Like, you know what I mean? There was probably only a handful of movies made after this that weren't propaganda movies. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy to think about it like that, like, you know, because the one thing we always thought when we were talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it was like 11 years after World War II ended, and to see like movies getting back on its feet, like, you know, it's crazy to think of that event that occurred between two iconic movies, like, you know, that kind of thing, and how cinema grew as well in the meantime. Because like 1932 and 1956, the difference in the technology that was used even then was crazy. And most of those advancements were probably made because of propaganda movies and wartime movies.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's crazy. Portable lights and cameras, you know, like
portable,
there were probably 6.5. It's like, it's nice and portable. 6 guys carrying it.
We haven't talked about the fact that the butler was just called Silver. Don't you think I know that, Silver? And at one point, Silver goes to hit murder, and Murder looks at Silver. Silver can't move towards Murder.
Man, the vulture sound effects.
Vulture.
That was a woman screaming. It had to be a woman screaming.
Whoever was in charge of the dog barking sound effects, who just really wanted their part to like. Just kind of, you showed up and you thought you were going to get a cool job, and if somebody says you're in charge of dog barking, and I'm going to be the greatest goddamn dog barker. Nobody was allowed to move without the sound of a vicious dog going, and frogs. But I loved it. I loved all the soundboard stuff. I just think someone was a little bit overzealous is all. You know?
Yeah, it's like I can half picture a guy with like a steel sheet doing the thunder. Yeah. Like it's even so close to like being back on stage. Like they don't even call it a cast at the start. It's just players. Like, you know what I mean? When I see that come up, it's like, you know, this is no last fucking movie when they're calling actors players. You know what I mean? It's like produced by Julius Caesar. Like
this was after Bela had done Dracula at this stage, though, hadn't he? So he had cemented himself, and this was basically just him coasting on his own name.
Yeah, on his own success. Yeah.
What an unbelievable career that man had. Like, that's a series for you right there. Bela
yeah,
Lugosi.
No, exactly.
Like, how did it end up on Plan 9? My God.
Obviously not well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was like 20 years later or something would have been.
He died as they were making it in 1956.
Yeah.
Did it bring him back as a zombie?
Actually, they brought back a guy who just wore a cape over his face. So he played Bella's part, but he never showed his face for the rest of the film. It's a truly spectacularly bad film.
I've only ever seen.
That's why it's so famous. It's famous.
That's why like, even this is the thing, when you're watching a film like this, you're thinking it's corny and stuff, but this, there was that kind of like camp theater feel that people, that's what people wanted, that's what played, that's what made money. But this film still had something like, oh, there's people who love cinema making this. It had a storyline. It was about love at the center, like these films often are, and then they put all these kind of horror elements around it. But then, like later on, I think people just obviously trying to get paid, and they just make terrible movies. This film had charm. It did. It had something. It had something at its core. Like,
it had a lot of hand clasping.
It did have a lot. I want to know why, whatever her name was, she was able to come back from the dead. She'd lost her soul. She wasn't able to talk, but she was a world-class piano player.
Yeah, I wondered about that. I was like, how do you remember how to play piano, but you can't remember the guy that you just got married to? Okay.
I thought it was a great choice now, actually, I have to say. Going back, kind of, I always say I'm going to go back to the 50s, I'm going to go back to the 30s and be a proper film buff. But then you realize you never do. And then something like this comes in, it's homework. You have to go and watch this movie, and I'm like, wow, there is treasure troves of camp and corny, but ultimately very important cinema.
Yeah.
Back there. And the horror genre, you always think of it kind of coming to fruition in the 80s, the golden era of horror, but people loved scary stuff since back the Penny Dreadfuls, since stories around campfires. And this just showed that even 100 years ago, there was money being made off horror. It is an unstoppable genre. It really, really is.
I always believe in the saying there's a fine line between laughing and screaming, because there's something so enjoyable about being like frightened or made slightly uncomfortable. And I know that sounds completely weird, but
like roller coasters.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's a excitement about a fear element. And I think that is exactly like what you were talking about. It's always been popular with people, you know? It's kind of like an adrenaline rush.
Oh yeah, but I always say it's because I know the way I always word it is that it's a very safe way to be in danger. It's a very safe way to be uncomfortable. Because, you know, I jump, there's, you know, they close the medicine cabinet like they always do. Never open a medicine cabinet in a horror movie. I don't know why they do it. And they shut it, and then there's the thing behind it, and it makes you jump. And that's fine. I'm just on my couch.
Right.
I'm absolutely fine.
Vicarious danger.
Just for 1 second there, it got me. And I always have to go like, I admit it got me. And I love it. You're absolutely right. There's something so delightful. And I think maybe that's the line. That's the thin line. It's delight. When you laugh at something, it's obviously like, it's very simple and easy to explain, but there is something delightful about getting that. And while these films wouldn't scare us because we're too desensitized to it, I don't think you can turn your nose up to what was the boundaries at the time. And this film was probably pushing boundaries for its time. The idea of somebody taking your free will away, or somebody taking your life away and bringing you back as a soulless husk, that's quite scary on the face of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
man, the time when the dude that drugged what was the girl's name in it? The guy
Madge
that
or something
is
like
it
that.
Madeline.
The guy that got her drugged so she become a zombie later on when he takes the drink off Bela Lugosi, and I'm like, that is one dumb motherfucker. Like, seriously, you're literally taking a drink off that guy. Really? Of all the people on the
just a
entire
pinprick.
Yeah.
Just in a flower, perhaps a glass of wine. Yeah.
And that's the guy that you let pour your drinks? Okay.
Yeah. Come on.
He looked like Houdini to me. I actually had to check to see if he had the hair and the kind of body type. Actually looked so much like Houdini. I knew it wasn't, but I wouldn't be satisfied until I checked it out. And Robert Fraser was the guy's name in real life, which you're absolutely right. Yeah. But every decision he made, even as he's like, what? It was so inappropriate. He's walking her down the stairs and he's trying to get her to walk out on her own wedding. And anything other than like, please don't be unreasonable from her would have been hysteric female. So but he's allowed to let's run away and throw it out the window.
Like
we could be somewhere
to the sanitarium with her.
Sanitarium with her. Yeah.
She's a witch. She had an opinion.
But she was quite like she was the helpless damsel kind of throughout it all,
Yeah, the old school dame kind of thing.
The dame, that was it. That's just the way film seemed to be.
She had massive eyes, though, didn't she? Like that.
Really did.
Yeah, like she's probably like dead now. Everyone in that movie's dead.
She only died. She only died in the 90s.
What?
Oh, really?
Yeah, she lived a long time. She only died in like 1990 or something. Jeez. Yeah, she lived a long time. I checked out. Yeah, she lived to be 91, I think.
Oh, wow. Really? Jesus.
Isn't that great?
Guess she won after all.
I guess the thing, she died she was born in 1899. Jesus. She died in 1990. Imagine the stories that woman. This is what I'm talking about. To be a fly in the wall, like to have been able to sit down and have a conversation with that woman would have been just a dream come true. It really would have. And to think it was just 1990,
Man, movies were so early then, though, weren't it? Like it's crazy. Like 90 years ago, this movie was 90 years old now. It's like, and it's mad that like the technology we have. Could you imagine being in 1932 and looking back 90 years into their history? Like it probably wouldn't have looked very different, except for a few advents of maybe widespread electricity. You have telegrams, all this kind of stuff. But now you look back and but the difference is back then you could probably put someone from 90 years previous into 1932 and they probably could have adjusted, but you could not put someone from 1932 into 2022. They'd be like living on it's like living on an alien world. You know what I mean?
Completely.
The advances we've made since then is insane. Like, you know what I mean? So that's what I love about movies, though. It's like a time machine. I think we said that in the Body Snatch episode too, that you can just go back and you can kind of peek through this window of time, and you can capture all these different things. And and it's cool to see what people were were afraid of back then. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, exactly. It's like, it's just like, as we said, what seems corny to us could have been terrifying to them. It's like when you hear about people fainting during The Exorcist or Alien, and like we love those chest burster scenes. We love all that gore. We love all that craziness, and it just shows you that, maybe we become more desensitized as a civilization over time or some shit. It is cool though. Like, and one thing about horror is like every generation has its own style and its own flavor. And to go back as far as 1932, it's just crazy to see one of the original styles and one of the original flavors,
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly.
Could you imagine these people seeing a Saw or something like that?
You want to give them a heart attack?
Yeah. Do you mean like an actual? Imagine like an actual Saw. All right, cool. Sure. What we do is do you have anything else to say, or we wrap this up? Because I know you're stuck on.
Wrap it up.
You're stuck for time, Kira, and we'll move on to Dead Alive then the next episode. That's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool beans. Kira, do you have anything else to say? Or no, do you have anything else to say about White Zombie, or we get the fuck out here?
No, we can get out here. I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Cool. Kira, do you want to tell the folks where they can find you on socials and whatnot?
Absolutely. So Scarifyer, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We have a community there as well. Don't be shy. We don't bite that hard. Come give us a shout. Let us know what's up.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Could you spell? Yeah, sorry. Just before I go, could you spell out your podcast? So if I want.
Yeah, sorry. It's a weird spelling. It's Scarifyer.
Scarifyer. Okay.
Scarifyer.
Gotcha.
Awesome.
Like Terrifier, but with an S.
That's fucking awesome. But all right, cool. So we get the fuck out of here. All right, I'm your host, Vince Green. No,
I'm your host, John Tui.
And that was White Zombie. This is Invasion of Potty Snatchers, and that was Kira Walker. See you next time, motherfuckers. Peace.
Teach.
Yo, she